The standard explanation is simple enough. Cities grow. Institutions follow. Governments build ahead of need. That is how infrastructure works. You plan for a population you expect to arrive, not the one standing in front of you right now. That explanation holds until you start measuring. Not measuring in vague terms, but in actual years. The gap between when a structure opened and when the population it was supposedly built for actually materialized. In many documented cases across the 19th and early 20th centuries, that gap is not 2 or 3 years. It is decades. Sometimes the population never arrived at scale at all, yet the whole remained fully operational, fitted with heating systems, ventilated galleries, and seating capacities that exceeded the surrounding town's entire recorded population at the time of construction. This video explores historical interpretations and unanswered questions found in existing records. It does not present definitive conclusions. What it does is look at the numbers. Take the public hall as a building type. Not the grand theater built for aristocratic performance, not the private club. The public hall, civic, open, ostensibly democratic. These structures appear throughout the Western world in a concentrated period, roughly between the 1850s and 1890s. The architectural language is consistent. Tall ceilings, wide-span interiors, ornate facades, mechanical ventilation systems, and capacities that, by any reasonable metric, dwarf the surrounding communities they served. Historians note this period as one of civic ambition. Municipal governments, newly empowered by reform legislation, wanted to project permanence and civic identity. That explanation is reasonable. What it does not fully address is the specific arithmetic. A town of 4,000 people does not typically require a public assembly hall with seating for 2,000. Not because civic pride is absent, but because full occupancy would require half the town to be in the same building at the same time, on a regular basis. The operational logic simply doesn't hold at that ratio. And yet, in documented case after documented case from this period, that ratio is not unusual. It is, in fact, closer to a pattern. The question this pattern raises is not one of intent. It is one of sequence. In conventional development models, population precedes infrastructure. Demand creates supply. A town grows, struggles with overcrowding, petitions for a larger venue, and eventually gets one. The lag is administrative. The structure arrives after the need has already been demonstrated. What researchers examining this period have noted in various municipal records is a different sequence. Structures, elaborate, expensive, durable structures, appear to precede not just the formal demand, but the population capable of generating that demand. The money had already been spent. The doors were already open. The chairs were already bolted to the floor. And then, years later, people slowly filled in around them. This inversion is worth pausing on. Not because it is impossible to explain. Explanations exist, and several of them are grounded in documented historical practice. Forward-looking municipal planning was real. Land speculation influenced infrastructure placement. Railway expansion created anticipatory development. Builders sometimes constructed for the city they expected rail access to produce. These are not fringe ideas. They appear in mainstream architectural and urban history. The complication is that they explain some cases clearly, and others only partially. When a town with rail access and a documented growth trajectory builds a hall ahead of need, the sequence is consistent with anticipatory logic. When a town without significant rail connection, without adjacent industrial development, and without recorded immigration pressure builds a hall of equivalent scale, the same explanation does not carry the same weight. And the record contains both. In substantial numbers. Scale, too, behaves strangely in this period. These are not modest buildings. The structural investment required for tall, wide-span, ornamented civic halls was significant by any era's standard. Foundations had to be engineered for permanence. Facades required skilled decorative labor. Interior fittings, cast iron galleries, tiered seating, integrated pipe organ chambers, mechanical ventilation, were not afterthoughts. They were designed into the original construction. This is what separates a civic hall from a temporary meeting room. A temporary structure accommodates present need. A permanent, over-engineered structure accommodates something else, a future need, or a need that was already known to exist, or some third possibility that the surviving records do not clearly specify. The engineering itself implies intention. Ventilation systems that could serve thousands. Acoustic profiles designed for mass address. Exit corridors wide enough to drain a crowd that, in many cases, the surrounding county could not have produced. Someone calculated for that crowd. Someone ordered those calculations. There is another dimension to this that conventional civic planning history tends to pass over quickly: the completeness of these halls at opening. Many civic buildings from other eras opened in stages. The shell was raised, the roof completed, the interior fitted over subsequent years as budgets permitted. That is the expected pattern of incremental municipal development. These halls frequently opened complete. Organ installed. Gallery railings finished. Heating operational. Kitchens, where they existed, stocked and staffed. Complete buildings, on day one, for populations that, by census data, could not sustain them. That is not an accusation. It is a description of what the records show. The question of why that sequence appeared, consistently, across documented sites, in a defined historical window, is one that standard explanations approach but do not, in every case, fully resolve. And when a pattern resists clean resolution across multiple examples, across multiple regions, the honest documentary position is to keep looking. Because the arithmetic, on its own, does not yet close. The pattern does not stay local. That is the first thing that becomes apparent when you move beyond individual cases and begin mapping these structures geographically. What appears, in isolation, to be a municipal quirk, a single town that built too large, too early, begins to look different when the same proportional anomaly appears in a town 300 miles away, built in the same decade, fitted to the same excess capacity, serving a population of comparable size. Patterns require distribution to become visible. This one has distribution. In the United States, the period between 1860 and 1900 produced a remarkable concentration of large civic halls in towns that were, by documented population figures, not large. The American Midwest is particularly well recorded in this respect. County seats that functioned as administrative centers for surrounding farmland, towns where the 1870 or 1880 census recorded populations in the low thousands, contain surviving structures whose interior capacities, when measured against those census figures, produce the same uncomfortable ratio seen elsewhere. Historians of American civic architecture have noted that the courthouse and hall model was partly aspirational. Towns on the frontier of settlement wanted to signal permanence to prospective settlers and investors. The building preceded the population because the building was part of the argument for why the population should come. That explanation is well documented and widely accepted. It does not, however, account for the mechanical specificity of what was built. A signal of permanence does not require an integrated ventilation gallery. It does not require a stage house with fly space and a dedicated orchestra pit. It does not require a kitchen with capacity for commercial-scale catering. These elements are operational, not symbolic. They serve a working crowd, a large, recurring, physically present crowd. And in many cases, the documentation of actual usage from the decades following construction shows the halls running at fractions of their design capacity, repurposed for smaller functions, or standing largely idle through significant portions of the year. The building argued for a population. The population, in many cases, did not fully arrive. The building remained, complete, waiting. The United Kingdom presents a variation of the same pattern that is, in some respects, even more precisely documented. British civic records from the Victorian period are unusually detailed. Rate books, building committee minutes, aldermanic proceedings, these survive in local archives at a level of granularity that allows historians to reconstruct not just what was built, but what the building committee believed they were building for, and what the actual usage figures looked like in the years following. Several industrial towns in the north of England, towns whose populations were growing through this period, which removes the simple explanation of miscalculation, built civic halls whose seating capacities exceeded their growth projections by margins that the surviving committee minutes do not fully explain. In some cases, the minutes record debates about whether the hall was too large. The decision to proceed at that scale was made anyway, with reasoning that the records characterize as forward planning, but which the subsequent decades did not always vindicate. This is a specific kind of anomaly. Not a town that built without thinking. A town that thought about it, recorded its uncertainty, and built at excess scale regardless. That decision, repeated, across multiple municipalities, with similar outcomes, invites closer examination of what assumptions were driving it. There is also the matter of timing compression. In several documented cases, the construction timeline for these structures is difficult to reconcile with the labor and material constraints of the period. Wide-span masonry structures with ornamental facades, fitted interiors, and integrated mechanical systems represent significant engineering projects. The expected construction period, given the documented workforce sizes in the surrounding towns, should be long. In some cases it was. In others, it was not. Some researchers examining these timelines have noted that the construction speed appears inconsistent with ground-up building at the recorded scale. This has generated competing interpretations, that local records are incomplete and undercount the actual workforce, that prefabricated elements were transported in and the fitting work was faster than exterior complexity implies, or that some of these structures involved modification of existing fabric rather than pure new construction. None of these interpretations is conclusive. Each has evidentiary support in some cases and evidentiary gaps in others. What they share is an acknowledgement that the simple version, town decides to build, town builds, town uses the building, leaves questions open in the documentation. Infrastructure before demand is not unique to public halls. In this same period, across the same geographies, a broader pattern of overprepared civic systems appears in the historical record. Water and sewage infrastructure scaled for populations significantly larger than the contemporary census. Road networks laid in advance of the settlement density required to justify them. Railway station buildings, the public-facing hall structures rather than the operational track infrastructure, built to a grandeur and capacity that exceeded, in many cases, the passenger volumes they ever subsequently handled. These are separate systems. They involve different funding mechanisms, different administrative bodies, different engineering traditions. And yet they appear together, in the same regions, in the same decades, at the same proportional excess. When multiple independent systems show the same directional anomaly, over-preparation, early completion, excess capacity, at the same time and place, the question of coincidence becomes harder to sustain as the sole available answer. It is not an accusation to note this. It is the basic discipline of comparative analysis. Some researchers who have examined these patterns collectively, across civic halls, water systems, rail infrastructure, and municipal administration, have begun grouping them under broader interpretive labels. These labels attempt to describe not a single building or a single decision, but a systemic condition, a world, in some documented regions, that appeared to be prepared for more people than were, by the available record, present at the time. How that preparation came to exist, whether through anticipatory planning of unusual sophistication, through population estimates that diverged from what census methods captured, or through some other mechanism the standard record does not clearly specify, is where interpretations begin to diverge. And one of those interpretive labels, appearing in discussions of this broader pattern with increasing frequency, carries a name that the mainstream historical record tends to treat with a particular kind of dismissal. That dismissal itself is worth examining. The word appears in online discussions, in alternative history forums, in documentary comments sections, and increasingly in academic papers that engage with it critically rather than ignore it entirely. Tartaria. It is worth being precise about what that word actually refers to, because the precision matters, and the imprecision is where most of the argument gets lost. In conventional historical usage, Tartaria, sometimes rendered as Tartary, was a real geographic designation. European cartographers from the 16th through the 18th centuries used it to describe a vast, loosely defined region spanning Central Asia, Siberia, and portions of what is now China and Mongolia. It appeared on maps. It was referenced in diplomatic correspondence. It was not a secret. It was simply a European label for territory that European institutions understood imperfectly and categorized broadly. That much is documented and not seriously contested. Where the interpretive divergence begins is in what certain researchers and commentators have proposed that label represents beyond its cartographic function. One interpretive strand, and it is important to be clear that this is an interpretation, not an established historical position, suggests that the architectural and infrastructural anomalies of the 19th century are consistent with a world in which a prior civilization, or a prior population density, or a prior administrative system, existed at a scale that the conventional historical timeline does not fully account for. Tartaria, in this reading, is not simply a map label. It is a placeholder term for something whose precise nature the existing record cannot definitively confirm or deny. A second interpretive strand takes a more moderate position. It does not propose a hidden civilization. It suggests instead that the 19th century may have involved a degree of population disruption, migration, displacement, demographic collapse in some regions, that census methodologies of the period were structurally unable to capture. In this reading, the buildings were not built for a future population. They were built for a present population that subsequently contracted, or moved, or was never fully counted. The excess capacity is real. The explanation is demographic rather than architectural. A third position, closer to the mainstream, holds that these anomalies are individually explainable through well-documented mechanisms, anticipatory planning, civic ambition, speculative investment, and that the appearance of a pattern across regions is partly a product of how the question is being asked. Select for overbuilt civic halls, and you will find them, because not every building decision was rational and not every municipal government was competent. The pattern, in this reading, reflects confirmation bias applied to a noisy historical record. Each of these positions has proponents. Each has evidentiary support of varying weight. None has, in the available literature, produced a definitive account that resolves the arithmetic across all documented cases. What the label Tartaria has done, whatever one concludes about the interpretive claims made under it, is give a name to a body of observation that was otherwise circulating without one. Names are useful. They allow discussion to accumulate. They allow researchers, amateur and professional, to find each other's work, to compare cases, to build a record of documented instances that can then be analyzed collectively rather than dismissed individually. The risk of a name is that it carries connotations that foreclose the analysis before it begins. Tartaria, in current usage, carries significant connotational weight. For some, it functions as a signal of serious alternative historical inquiry. For others, it functions as a marker of unfalsifiable speculation. For mainstream historians, it tends to trigger a dismissal that, as noted earlier, often engages with the most extreme claims made under the label while leaving the underlying observational questions unaddressed. That asymmetry is itself worth noting. The strongest critiques of Tartaria adjacent claims focus on the interpretive conclusions, that a civilization was erased, that the historical record was deliberately falsified, that photographic and architectural evidence has been systematically suppressed. These are strong claims, and the evidentiary standards required to support them are high. But the observational layer, the buildings, the timelines, the capacity ratios, the infrastructure sequences, precedes those conclusions. The observations do not require the conclusions. They exist independently in the documented record, and they warrant examination on their own terms, regardless of what interpretive label is applied to them. The public halls are still standing. That is perhaps the most straightforward fact in all of this. Whatever the explanation for their construction, civic ambition, demographic anticipation, speculative planning, something the record does not currently name, the structures themselves are durable, documented, and measurable. Their dimensions are on record. Their construction dates are on record. The populations of the surrounding towns at the time of their construction are on record. The arithmetic remains what it is. A hall that seats 2,000, in a town of 4,000, built before any documented event that would predictably double the town's assembly needs, represents a question that the record raises and does not, by itself, answer. That question does not require conspiratorial framing. It does not require a lost empire. It requires only that the numbers be taken seriously rather than absorbed into a general narrative of Victorian civic ambition and left there, unexamined. Some researchers will continue to examine them under the Tartaria label, with all the interpretive freight that name carries. Others will continue to examine them through conventional architectural and urban history, finding explanations that satisfy some cases and strain against others. A smaller number will hold the question open, not as a rhetorical device, not as a setup for a conclusion that hasn't been found, but because the honest position, when the arithmetic does not close, is to say so. The buildings were built. They were built large. They were built complete. They were built, in many documented instances, before the populations that would have justified them by any conventional planning logic had materialized. What was known, at the time of their construction, that we do not currently have a full account of, that is the question the record leaves open. And open questions, in documentary terms, are not a failure. They are where the work continues.